Welcome to We Have a Spiritual Problem, a podcast exploring the deep interconnections between personal wellness, societal challenges, and spiritual growth. Hosted by Dr. Jeff Armstrong, this thought-provoking series tackles the big questions. How do we cultivate a well-centered life in a world that often feels unbalanced? What role does spirituality play in solving today's personal and collective problems? Drawing from concepts of well-centered fitness, spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social wellness, we bring you engaging conversations with experts, thinkers, and everyday people who challenge us to rethink our approaches to health, happiness, and harmony. Together, we uncover solutions to life's problems that start within. My guest today is Kelli Malcolm. Kelli's unique background as both a lawyer and a spiritual guide reflects her deep understanding of how laws, both spiritual and man-made, govern our lives. Everything is the law, she says. Whether it is spiritual laws or man-made laws, it is how you apply them that makes the difference. This understanding allows her to guide clients in a way that integrates practical wisdom with spiritual principles, empowering you to navigate both your inner and outer worlds with clarity and purpose. Kelli, it is great to have you on this podcast today. I just want to have you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you have bridged the gap from law to spiritual guide.
Well, thanks, Jeff, for having me on the podcast. And I think I've been a spiritual leader, guide since I've been little. I mean, my first memory was when I was in third grade, telling people God was everywhere. And it's like, where does a third grader get that information? When I was 12, tarot cards came to me. And I was fascinated with the pictures, and I would get messages. And lo and behold, by the time I was a senior in high school, I was at the prom, but I was in the back reading everybody's tarot cards. I was the woo person back there. And since then, my spiritual journey has continued. I've suffered losses. My father passed away shortly after I started law school. And he was the one who asked me to continue, make sure you finish law school. So I made the promise to my dad, and I fulfilled it. And so lo and behold, when that happens, you become a lawyer. It's just a title society assigns to you, right? And my real love has always been inquiry, study, asking questions, asking the whys. Why am I here? Those type of things. And law has a lot of questions. We ask people questions on the stand. The quality of your questions determines the results. And I learned that in law. But what I also started to realize is everything is law, whether it is man-made law or spiritual law. It's all in the application, how you apply law. And what I was realizing is that people are really good at recognizing man-made laws. For example, a red light to stop. Either you're going to get a ticket or you might cause an accident. And so people are really good at seeing the red lights, but they're not good at seeing the red light spirit throws. And a lot of times people blow past those red lights because they're unaware, ignorant of spiritual laws, or what I call soul tools, tools that you can apply. So for me, it's all the same. I've been able to, in my law practice, I started representing abused and neglected kids. That's where I began. And I could see that systems were broken because they weren't recognizing spiritual laws or helping people develop the innate gifts they already have to move forward. And so way back, I think around 2010 or 11, I wrote my first book, which was Sidestepping the 12 Steps, which is how to use metaphysical principles to move beyond addiction. And I kept going on my studies. It's like the Hansel and Gretel. You follow the breadcrumbs and you continue onward. And based on that, I just finished writing my second book, which is called Awaken the Power Within. And it's it's a path for spiritual growth, for personal transformation, looking at some of these main laws and applying them and using soul tools to help you get there. So that's how I look at things.
So, what helped shape this worldview?
I think a lot of it, Jeff, is being able to stand back and try and see a bigger picture. When I was little and I lost my dad, I was 23 and I lost him and my pet, my dog. Oh gosh, I love Beezy so much. And I lost them both in the same year.
Oh, wow.
And it was, you can take a look at things and say, I'm a victim. Or you can take a look at things and say, what can I learn from this? And for whatever reason, I had that innate sense to ask that second question. What can I learn from this? And then from there, I started looking at life through an artist's eyes, not necessarily a lawyer's eyes. I never really, I never wanted to be a lawyer. It just so happened I was good at it, right? And so what I ended up doing is using those artist eyes, another way of looking at creation and seeing beauty amongst the ashes, being able to pick up what good can I find out of this. And I think I also had this sense that I came in, what you send out, you get back. And so instead of being angry at setbacks or losses or people that may have betrayed you or done stuff to you that you didn't feel comfortable, right? Being able to look at it and say, well, maybe they don't have the skill set. Maybe it's not anything about me. Maybe it's a path for them to grow. That maybe this is the only coping skill they have. And I think when I started working with the abused kids and families in that area, I realized how different people grow up and how those limiting beliefs get formed at a very young age. So that then became, well, how do you get those beliefs? And my next question is, how do you change them, right? How do you go forward? I'm sure you've experienced stuff like that too, right?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. And it's interesting. You talk about your lawyer eyes and then your artist eyes. Do you think that is something that needs to be distinct, or one is better than the other? Or is it more important that we have, like right now, I wear contacts and my contacts are considered monovision, where one contact is set up to be for distance and the other is for closer vision? Do you think we need more that kind of vision where we have both a lawyer eye and an artist eye, or is it more important to have one or the other?
I think the more kinds of lenses you can look through, the better the world you're going to see. That's a great analogy about the different eyes
Yeah.
because it's perspective. It's like when you have a child, they see things in a certain way. And sometimes you need the child's eyes to experience the joy and the wonder and how cool, whether it is bumblebees and all the different kinds of bees there are and what ants do and all of that. And other times you need the eyes of somebody who is going to, does this make sense? If what I'm hearing, does it line up with my gut? Not necessarily what you're seeing outside, but does it ring true inside of me? And I think that I would look at those eyes probably as having different perspectives. It's not, it's like how would an artist view something versus how would an attorney? How would a dock worker? How would a single parent? They all will come at it from different ways. And to me, there's no judgment. There's a good story that maybe you've heard. It's the Chinese farmer story.
I
And
don't know if I've heard it.
I'm really love telling stories. So anyway, it's a story about this Chinese farmer who lived in a village and was obviously a farmer and had a horse that he used to plow his fields. And one day the horse ran away, and the villagers came to the farmer and said, "Oh, so bad, bad thing you lost your horse." And he goes, "Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't." Well, about a week later, the horse returns with a herd of wild horses. And the Chinese villagers are going, "Oh, what good fortune. Your horse came back with all these friends. And oh, isn't this good?" And the farmer's like, "Well, maybe yes, maybe no." A little later, his son was trying to break the horses, the wild horses, and was bucked and broke his leg. Then the villagers come back and say, "Oh, so bad. Your son broke his leg, maybe not so good." And then about a week after that, the king of the country decided to invade and go to war and draft all of these young men. And because his son had a broken leg, he couldn't be drafted. And then the villagers go, "Maybe good, maybe bad, maybe we don't know." And it's like you don't know, because a lot of times the hardest things that you go through have the most blessings in them for you. But if you don't have eyes and a lens to see those blessings, you're going to miss them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one of my favorite questions to ask people, and it's one I've gotten asked a lot, and I won't put you on the spot and ask this question because I'm giving the answer before I even ask it. But I've often been asked the question, if you can go back in time and change one thing, what would you change? And my answer has always been nothing, because if I go back and I change anything, there's a likelihood that it's going to change a trajectory in my life or somebody else's life, because we are so intertwined and interconnected that even though it might not have significance for me, it may affect somebody else.
I
And
agree. It's those, you go down different paths, and you have the choice to go down these different paths. And the other thing is, you don't know if you may get an opportunity down the road to experience the same thing you could have experienced 5 or 10 years ago. I tend to look at life and live life through that spiritual lens. But the question I ask is, how do you want to be remembered? And live your life from that perspective. And do you want to be remembered as kind? What are your core values? And if you live life, whether you want to call it spiritual or not, that is definitely a spiritual approach. And if you study any of the great teachers, masters in any of the religions, you'll find that was their modus operandi. They had core values, core truths, and they acted from that. We're human beings, not human doings. And a lot of times people put the doing before the being.
yeah,
And I think that it could go back to from what you were talking about and change things. It's you who needs to change inside. So if you went back, it would still probably play out the same way, because your being hasn't changed. A lot of times people say, and that kind of goes to your question, they'll say, "If only I knew what I knew now and could go back and change." And so it's more being able to get in touch with those inner core values and be able to act upon those. And in the face of adversity, but also a lot of times when things are going really well, I find people mess up too. Don't you? I mean, it's not necessarily just the bad times. Too much good people can't handle.
right. So you often in your spiritual guidance talk about the inner I am. Can you explain
Mhm.
that a little bit?
Yeah, people tend to define themselves by the outside world, by outside conditions. I'm a practicing family law attorney, so that means divorce, custody. And their Facebook status, that's like the first thing they change. I am single. I'm no longer married. But you don't define yourself by your Facebook status, by your title, by your profession. What you don't define yourself by whether you're tall, short, all the physical stuff. You define yourself by who you are, which is your core values. I believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So you can experience a lot of different things. You can experience relationships, being in one, being not in one. You can experience being a parent, a grandparent, You can experience wealth, lack of wealth. You can experience different professions. But inside, within you, that's not who you are. And so when I started, and this was way back when I was helping abused and neglected kids, I'm not worthy. My parents don't love me. My parents love alcohol more than me. And they start defining themselves by lack, worthless. Nothing good ever happens to me. I've got a messed up family. Nothing good will ever happen. And they start defining themselves that way by outside circumstances. You can have these outside circumstances, and other people will define themselves differently. Like Wayne Dyer, who was pretty big in this whole world, he was a foster kid. And I don't know if people know that or if it's
I never knew
common.
that.
Yeah. And he looked at going to foster homes as the best thing ever. He was fed 3 times a day. He didn't have that before. And he loved snow. He used to sleep with a snow shovel when he knew it was going to snow because he could get out there first thing in the morning and shovel people's sidewalks, and he could come home by noon with $100 in his pocket. So again, because inside of him, he was defining himself as somebody who was going to experience the best of life. And people have that adage, turn lemons into lemonade sort of thing. But he lived from that viewpoint. He didn't define himself as a foster kid. He didn't define himself as unemployed. Those are temporary. And in fact, everybody was unemployed when they were born. I mean, it's all perspective. So how about you? When you think about defining yourself and the I am statements, what comes up for you?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, I probably define myself from some of those different outer labels as well. Educator, a father, a husband, podcaster. But I don't know if I put a finger. I mean, I do feel like I have a deeper I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that I'm still trying to find. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like I have a purpose. And when I talk purposes with a capital P,
Yeah.
and, that I have some role to play in humanity,
Mm-hmm.
but to be able to define that role, I don't know. And maybe some of it is just a false sense of humility, maybe that you can't express that as much. But that is a really tough question. I should have probably been prepared for that one. And it may take me some time to figure out. And maybe that's kind of part of what exploring this podcast is for me, is to start pulling away some of those layers and get deeper and deeper down to who am I, why am I, what is my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And
ask me in a couple of seasons of this podcast.
well, and those are the questions that I find fun to explore
Yeah.
because it's easy to look at your circumstances and do the definition, right? All of that was gone. Who are you at your essence? And there's all tons of core values. One isn't better than another. It's just
Yeah.
what you resonate with, right? So if curiosity is a core value, then you're going to probably seek out experiences that satisfy that curiosity.
Yeah. So my core values that I reflect on almost daily basis are faith, family, friends,
Mhm.
growth, health, and impacting others.
Right. Yeah.
So that's, I think, maybe if you ask me again that who I am, it's that role having an impact on others
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is what I'm here to do. What that
Yeah.
impact is, I'm still trying to figure out maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And having a sense of, sometimes you feel like, oh, I'm not really impacting anybody. I'm not having any great significance here. But, it's that change affect one person and they go off and they affect many more people. And I feel that way as an educator a lot of times. It's like, what real impact am I having? I'm not making a lot of money at this. I'm not teaching at like a big R1 institution. I have written one textbook and I think 6 people have bought it. And those are my students that think they have to buy it. And so there's times when I feel like I haven't really had much impact. It's like when I moved to Oregon, I thought we were moving out here with some kind of purpose. And I realized I don't like it here that much.
Weather.
Horrible thing to admit. Some of it's the weather. There's a very different style of people here. I mean, there's great people. I'm not knocking anybody, but they're different than they are back east.
Yeah.
And just my job didn't. It's not. It's okay. It's just not anything as great. And I've given up some pretty good positions to move to where we're at. And we took a huge pay cut moving out here, and I'm still not quite back to where I could be after
Mhm.
16 years.
Mhm.
But a lot of times then I'll just look at, well, maybe it's not about me, it's about who am I impacting.
Yeah.
And I'm maybe not here for me, but bringing the kids here, how has that impacted them? The teachers, the coaches that they've had, the friends that they've made are all shaping who they're to become.
Right.
And so in that regard, I do have a purpose here, and it's may not seem significant at this moment, but years from now, looking back, saying, okay, well, if I did not do this, then this may not be the case. And so,
Well,
yeah, it's
you get into another portion that's really interesting, and it's measuring results. When I don't know, I can't really speak Eastern but in the Western world, we measure results differently, right? We measure results by money mostly, and that tends to be a measure of success. And I would question that. Is that really how you measure results? And so you're talking about results with your children. That is going to be totally different because you're going to want your children maybe to grow up and have resilience, or maybe to have compassion, or maybe to have a adventure, or maybe it's laughter. And so it seems to me that all of those other items, they're intangible. And we don't have a good mechanism in the 3D world to measure intangible results. But at the end of your life, how do you want to be remembered? All of those intangible results are, to me, they become manifest when you go to memorials. And when my mom passed, she wanted to be remembered for two things. One was her laughter, and the second was she loved to dance. And honest to goodness, Jeff, when she passed, the song playing was I Could Have Danced All Night. I couldn't make this up, right? And I go outside and I'm sitting on the driveway and a neighbor passes and, how's your mom? And I said, well, she just passed. He said, your mom was the funniest person. And he told me a story that just had set him off laughing. So, again, my lesson about how you want to be remembered was right there. And to me, those are the important things. When you get to the end of your life, you're not going to worry about how much time you spent in the office, but the impact, like you're discussing, with your children, with your wife, with colleagues, with students, that has measurable results, but it's not on a balance sheet.
yeah, it's interesting when I start feeling those feelings of not being quite successful at what I wanted to be doing is almost always when I'm going to get an email from a student that just, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I had you in such and such class. I just wanted to let you, I got into graduate school, or I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
this now. And I just wanted to thank you for being such an influence in my life. Yeah.
Exactly. And those to me are those signs from the universe that keep saying, go with that direction. And right now, a lot of people are into the angel numbers, the 111, 333, blah, blah, blah. And they look at that as signs. And I'm like, well, this is good. People are starting to pick up that the universe, God, spirit, however you want to describe it, sends us signals, but we have to be paying attention. And so the messages from your students are signals saying that, yes, you are fulfilling your purpose that you set in this life. You are walking the path. And as you continue to go forward, you'll learn more and more about who you are, your I ams, and you'll start taking more and more actions that are aligned with that. And they just feel comfortable. And there could come a season, Jeff, where being in Oregon no longer serves. And you decide to move. It could be Arkansas. It could be any place. But there will be something there. It's like Hansel and Gretel and following those breadcrumbs. Because when you look back, you go, wow, there's where you see all the connections. But it's not necessarily when you look forward, right?
Yeah, I think part of a reflection of my inner messed up child is talking about Hansel and Gretel following the crumbs. And I'm thinking, yeah, didn't they follow the crumbs to the witch that cooked them?
Yeah, yeah, they did, but
That's true. Okay.
you know, they
So you got to
escaped.
look to, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, right? We don't
Exactly.
know yet.
We don't know yet. But I think if people keep that in mind, just you don't know. And we're so quick to judge and put a value. But I've learned you can hit pause.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you see it with your kids when you're raising them that, oh, don't do that. Nope, nope. Don't put the screwdriver in the light thing. Not a good idea. And you can actually see them thinking about it, right? But we have the same abilities inside to hit pause before we panic. You can always, I look at it, you can always panic. I can set Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That you can panic all you want. But in the meantime, try something different.
Yeah. So when you hear the phrase, we have a spiritual problem, what's that mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it's a problem that we're disconnected from our true self. I think that people have so many layers on them. Here's a good analogy. It's like being in Vegas and it's 110 and you have long johns on, you have a parka on, you have a windbreaker on. You've got all these masks and it's 110 out. And you can't figure out what your problem is. You need to take off the layers and peel things away. And I think that when you start looking at spiritual laws, comparison is not in there. It's not a spiritual law. That doesn't come from how the universe operates. And I think that, yeah, we live in a world of duality, but comparison and comparing ourselves to others is not something that moves us as spiritual beings forward. The only thing to look at is we're going to make mistakes, but it's a matter of, do I have a variety of them? To me, if I have a variety of mistakes, I'm moving forward. If I keep making the same one over and over again, it means there's a lesson that I'm just refusing to learn.
Yeah.
Right? But the spiritual problem to me is that people tend to not know that they're divine, not know that they've got so much within them, and to start self reflecting and turning inward. And once you do that, then your outside world changes.
So how does our kind of inability to do that manifest in societal challenges?
I think having outside information and the outside world dictate what you think and what you believe. For example, if you're a kid and you're told, I'm not good at math, you're going to shy away from math problems, anything having to do maybe with computers. And that was one individual. If you take it on a group consciousness and what's out there is fear, fear does not lead to growth. There's been so many scientific experiments done with the power of words, the power of beliefs, how it affects plants, how it affects water. I mean, there's many examples out there. But if you take a group consciousness that's fear-based, competitive, I have to get mine before you get yours, that the rivalry, the competition, that then serves to form this thing that is not about love, not about growth. Not, and that is the disconnect because there's plenty to go around. I've never once seen a squirrel having a nervous breakdown on a tree wondering where his nuts are coming from, right? And
That's true.
and if you start taking a broader perspective and start looking at why are people saying these things? And is it true? Does it resonate for me? And a lot of times you'll find out, no, it's limiting beliefs, it's paradigms, it's operating systems that may serve some, but don't serve all. And then does it serve me? But me and my growth.
So
What do you think?
I think that's great. And I was thinking too, your law practice and your experience has all been with children who have been in disadvantageous situations and situations where they've been harmed or are hurting.
Mm-hmm.
What role do you think concepts like compassion, forgiveness, and mindfulness play in solving what might be described as spiritual problems?
Huge, huge. Forgiveness. I cannot emphasize that concept enough. And it starts with self-forgiveness. You have to forgive yourself. And most people will give everybody else a break but themselves, right? And then the second thing that you have to be able to do is learn to forgive others. But it's not the way people think of forgiveness. Forgiveness is all about you letting go. I wish you well, but you don't have to wish them back. And to get to that place of where your emotions are unaffected what's happening or occurring to somebody else, right? That you can literally deep down inside say, I wish them well. I wish the best for them. And that's forgiveness. Many times, say in the law practice with divorce, oh, I forgive him or her. Those are just words. If they're here, but they haven't made it 18 inches down into your heart and soul.
Yeah.
With the mindfulness practice, I would teach the kids breathing. Focus on something else. And that's where sometimes crystals can come into play because kids like crystals and holding pretty objects. And it gets them to take their attention off of something else and use what I call the soul tool of will. Will is your ability to focus and to take your mind off of one thing and focus on something else. And many times people say, well, I can't do that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can. If your house was burning down, you would not be having this conversation with me, right? You can
Right.
focus. And so I think that's important. And mindfulness is being present in the moment, not worrying about yesterday, not worrying about what happened in the past, actually experiencing the moment. And with the kids are really good at doing that practice. You take them out to a playground and have them get on the swings and the slides, and they're totally present, which to me is a reminder as adults, we need play. We need to have fun. And a lot of times, I think we don't do that. We don't give ourselves permission to laugh and to joke and to act silly. When's the last time you saw an adult skipping? Right?
Yeah. Maybe in like a Pee Wee Herman movie or something like that,
Yeah,
but that's about
yeah.
it.
And then right. And that's what they do, and they make fun of it.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's the joy of life. To be able to have that freedom of movement and not care what other people think. My mom, oh my gosh, Jeff, one time, this is her gift of humor, right? One time my sister went to go pick her up at the airport and she was dressed as Mary Poppins.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Wait, your sister was or your mom was?
My mom was getting off the plane and she was like, oh, but she loved to make people laugh. I mean, just doing fun, silly stuff, right? It wasn't like she was crazy or off her rocker. She just got a kick out of watching everybody's reactions to it. And there's something to be said. And when you start realizing you can laugh at yourself, you don't have to take yourself so seriously. Make different mistakes and see what happens.
Yeah, I have my dad's sense of humor. He's never dressed up like Mary Poppins or any of that kind of stuff, but we have our ongoing kind of family jokes. You hear people say dad jokes. I mean, I literally have my dad jokes,
Yeah.
my dad's sense of humor. I mean, I cannot go to a restaurant where they have tiramisu on the menu, and I will insist on having to order it just so I say tiramisu and get this puzzled look from me. No, it's tiramisu, no, tiramisu,
Mhm.
or creamy brulee, and he had a whole list of those different things. And my wife gets so agitated by it when I do it. And there was one time we were vacationing up in northern Michigan, and we're ordering dessert, and I kept saying tiramisu, and the waiter comes over and she said, "Well, have the tiramisu." And the waiter just looks at it, writes it down, and walks away. And I said, "What did you order?" She said, "Tiramisu." And I said, "No, you didn't." And she was so embarrassed that she just didn't think about it.
Yep, yep. And going back to the spiritual stuff, most people don't realize laughter is spiritual.
Oh, yeah.
They always think of people like Jesus and Buddha and Gandhi and Muhammad as being these serious people. They laughed.
Yeah.
They enjoyed life, and laughter is a part of it. And I think we need to bring a lot more of that back. People are
Right.
just so focused on the next shoe that's going to drop. And again, that's coming from fear. And fear is the opposite of growth. So you need to come from love and compassion, which goes back to your question about mindfulness, forgiveness, gratitude. And there's a big difference between being thankful and being grateful. And
Right.
the difference is gratefulness is just, you don't need a reason. You don't need an intervening outside event. That's the legal jargon. Was there an intervening event? You don't need one of those. You basically are just grateful that you woke up. Not everybody did. You're grateful that you can see. Not everybody can, right? You're grateful that you can experience life and just enjoy being present. It's huge. And I think working on those practices and that mindfulness will help with that too.
I'm on a campaign to get the spelling of gratitude changed to having two T's in the middle. So it's an attitude of gratitude.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
try and promote that a lot.
No, I think that would be great. Bumper stickers, right? Or license plates, and have people figure out what the wording is.
Yeah, but people would be like, "Look at that idiot, doesn't even know how to spell."
Well, yeah, that's the spiritual problem.
So what practices or tools, whether spiritual, secular, or scientific, do you believe can help individuals and communities address some of these spiritual and existential struggles that we face?
Wow, there's a ton. There's a ton. One for challenging people is try and have a complaint-free day.
I can't do that.
Yeah, where you don't complain to other people. Start small. Then try not to complain to yourself, right? Good practices are, I really believe in journaling. And there's lots of great journaling books out there, journaling exercises. My book contains some, but journaling about your feelings. Journaling about, because thoughts cause your feelings. So if you can identify your feeling, you can go back and figure out, what was I thinking that caused the thought in the first place? Was it a thought of lack? Was it a thought of protection? Someone's going to get me, and whatever it happens to be. But I think journaling is a great practice. Wonderful practice. Getting outside, getting in touch with nature. We've lost that disconnect, I think, a lot of times living in cities and suburbs even, where you don't get to see the bees, the birds, the all of nature. And I really think that in exercise, you mentioned health. Part of the health thing, I think, is just walking and really taking time to look and see what you're seeing, because it's amazing what's out there. Truly beautiful. Those, yeah, kind of terrorizing your thoughts with what could go wrong and catastrophizing, thinking of the worst case scenario. Why don't you flip it and try and think of what's the best thing and focus on that? And what if it's possible, right?
Yeah, I always liked Robert Schuller's power of possibility thinking, where it was like when he was building the Crystal Cathedral, it was like, if I needed to raise $1 million, I could find one donor that could give me $1 million, which is very unlikely. I could find two donors that would give me $500,000
Hmm.
each. That's a little bit more likely. A little bit more likely that maybe I can find four donors to give me 250,000, and it
Yeah.
keeps breaking it down to where, or I can find 1 million people to give me $1. And it's like every problem is solvable if we begin to break it down and think of the possibilities and think with a more positive type of mindset.
Yeah, exactly. What if? And then you can use your memory to go back in time, and instead of it being negative, think of all the good that's happened to reinforce that what if possibility that you're talking about with Schuler.
I try and work with my students to get them thinking in terms of what are the obstacles to the issue at hand? If we talk about obesity, why are people obese? Well, it's easy to say they're just lazy, they eat too much. Well, why are they lazy? Why are they not exercising? Why are they eating too much? Why do they not have good food? Well, okay, well, we have very few grocery stores, but we got a lot of fast food restaurants per
Yep.
capita. We have really neighborhoods that are not designed for people to get out and be active. We
Yeah.
have great amount of fear in our communities. I drive my daughter to drop her off at school. She'll even comment how why these kids get a bus. She doesn't get a bus. We live as far as you can possibly live from the school, and because of the weird ways that they configure the districts, we have two high schools within our district,
Hmm.
and our neighborhood flips back and forth. So the last couple of years, there's been no bus available to her. So I have to drive her every morning, which is a huge inconvenience considering I have another hour commute to work
Yeah.
and have to teach morning classes. But so she doesn't get a bus. So I'm driving her, and you see these kids that are living within a mile of the school waiting for a bus to pick them up. And she's like, why can't they walk to school? And when she did have a bus, like middle school and everything, we had the bus literally stopped at there was like we live in a cul-de-sac, so there's a cul-de-sac behind us. So there's a block, how do you describe it? We're basically separated by a block, and there's a bus the bus stops at both ends of that block. It's like, well, can't we just stop once and have some of those kids walk a little bit further?
Right.
But we live in this fear that our kids, if they have to walk too far, or they get out of our sight as we're watching them go to the bus stop, something terrible might happen to them.
Yep.
And it's like, what happened when I was a kid that, we'd walk, it was at least a half mile to school for most of us,
Hmm.
for high school. The kids that took a bus, it was usually, a quarter mile, half mile to the bus stop.
Yeah.
There was a fair amount of walk. I remember once when I was I think it was in first grade, I had two older sisters, and my younger sister was still not in school yet. So we were walking down to the bus stop, and the bus never showed up. It was a snowy day, and I think the bus just couldn't make it or whatever it was. My sisters all went home, and they're like, my mom's like, "Where's Jeff?" And they're like, "I don't know. We thought he was home." And so she's panicking a little bit. She goes down. I'm not at the bus stop. She calls the school and says, "Oh, he's sitting here in class." I walked to school with a few
Yes.
other kids. It
Yes.
was like a mile or so to school. It was just a little bit over that. It was not a bad walk, and well, I might as well just walk to school if the bus doesn't show up.
Mm.
You could never do that now. Parents would be freaking out, and they'd be suing the school over how could you let him do that? Blah, 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 blah.
Right. Right.
So,
No,
yeah,
but
we live in an odd society now where fear is really driving a lot of these problems that we're just afraid to interact with one another.
I think so too. And have you seen changes over the time from teaching with kids and receptivity, or maybe having to change the way you approach teaching because of that?
Oh, yeah, quite a bit. And it's been about 25 years teaching. It's changed a lot. And I first started teaching at Eastern Michigan University, which is in Ypsilanti, Michigan. So I had a lot of students that were coming out of Detroit, inner city Detroit, and these are kids that now first generation college students,
Hmm.
very disadvantaged, and they were much more apologetic about not succeeding on an exam or something like that, and I'll do better next time. And now it's like you have more kids that are of much more privileged situations, like, well, why are you making the test so hard? Or give us a break here. Why do we have to come to class? And it just, they're not as driven to come to class and participate and do all those types of things. And so it's a very different mindset and attitude amongst
What about
younger people now.
gratitude? How would you look, if you were looking at kids, say, from Michigan versus the kids you're teaching now, do you see gratitude or a change or maybe lack of gratitude nowadays?
I see both. I see some kids that really do have significant gratitude, and then I have others that just really don't. They don't appreciate the opportunity you're giving them.
Okay.
So it's a mix.
So going back to one of your questions, do you see that as evidence of a spiritual problem?
Oh, yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I think every problem is a spiritual problem. And that's, again, really the point of this whole podcast. And what is defining then what is spiritual? Because for a lot of people, you say, well, it's just, you're saying I have a spiritual problem. Well, I'm an atheist and I don't believe that there is a spiritual dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes to the question, how do you define spiritual? And to me, spiritual is the concept that there is something greater than self.
Yeah.
And like one area that I teach, I have a pathophysiology and exercise class. And one of the exercises I have them do every year is to read the 1968 article by Garrett Hardin titled The Tragedy of the Commons. And it's written about kind of population explosion. And I always point out to my students, it's like back then they were talking in terms of like the population approaching 5 billion, and we are now at about 8 billion.
Right.
And so that problem has not been solved. And he talks about technical versus societal solutions to things. It just addresses a lot of different issues that don't necessarily relate to exercise science. But when we talk in terms of healthcare, and I always talk, I believe that we have a right to universal health, but I think it gets a little bit more muddied when we start talking about everybody has a right, universal right to health, or there's a right to universal health care. Because if you say everybody has that right to universal health care, then we get into this idea of the commons, where in the tragedy of the commons, it's where you have, I think it's based on like feudal England, where the farmers have a share of the land and they can each put one cow on the land and the land will be sustained and there's no deterioration of the resources. And invariably somebody is going to come along and say, well, what harm is it if I put one more cow on my land? And really there's not a lot of significant impact there, because that one cow, then the impact is spread over all the other farmers and we don't really see major problems. And so then another farmer says, well, what's the impact of me putting one more on? And next we're overcrowded and we're depleting the resources. And so I have them read that article and address it from the perspective of how does this impact our responsibilities to personal health and the impact on the healthcare systems. Mm-hmm. And I just let them go with it. And it was an assignment that I did in, I forget what year, it was probably either my sophomore or junior year as an undergrad at West Virginia University. I had to take one of those general education classes in geography, and I took this class, and we had to write a bunch of different papers. And I still have that paper stored away here at home. I mean, 40 plus years later, I still have that because it's been such an impact on my worldview.
Yep.
And I see that, this whole idea of the commons and the tragedy of the commons, as a reflection of the spiritual problems in our society. It's like we wouldn't have that tragedy of the commons if everybody thought, well, I have a responsibility to maintain this commons for the welfare of everyone else. So I have a responsibility from healthcare perspective. I have a responsibility to be healthy so that I'm not draining resources, so that people that have health issues that are beyond their control can have access to adequate care. Mm-hmm. You know, because we only have so many resources.
Right.
And so I can go off on that in so many different directions. It's like almost any problem that I face, it's like, oh, tragedy of the commons here.
Well, and then what core value did you identify with in that article, Tragedy of the Commons?
Core value. If you go to like my core values, you know, the faith, family, friends, family, growth, health, and impacting others, I think almost all of those kind of impact. I have a responsibility to friends being community, my family, and health being in there, and growth,
But
becoming a better person constantly,
yeah.
and then impacting others. How does my life impact positively or negatively other individuals?
So deep down inside, there could be these core values of responsibility, cooperation,
Yeah.
self-reflection that drive all those other core values
Yeah.
that you have, right? But I mean, I think that's an excellent example, Jeff, of something that made a huge impact on you very young. And if you keep digging into that and keep saying, what was it about that so resonated with who I am? Because it's a combination. It was the idea of cooperation, responsibility, self-reflection, wanting to benefit the whole, right? And and so I bet you anybody you'll find those values deep down inside of you, and that lead you to do a whole pile of other things.
Or lead me to kick myself for not doing a whole host of other things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But those are the teaching moments when you can stop somebody and say, why did that make such a huge impact to you? What was it speaking into you? Because it was speaking life into you,
Yeah.
right?
And I find I teach from a much more spiritual perspective anymore too. It's like I'm an exercise physiologist, so I'm a scientist, and it's, of course, in my area, it's not necessarily always black and white. It's like everybody is different. There's the principle of individuality when it comes to physiological responses. But I teach from a perspective of what I say is biomechanical psychosocial. That any of the problems that we are dealing with in our health and our performance and things like that, we have our biology, we have the mechanical structure, our movement patterns and things like that we have developed or been born with. And then but we also have to interact with how does our psychology drive what we do or don't do, and how does our interaction with society affect all this too. And so none of these problems are going to be solved easily by just simply saying take a pill or have this surgery or do this particular type of training. There's a lot more to it. And
so would you say it's more treating symptoms rather than getting to the causes?
Is a problem, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem. And that's a big problem in medicine is that we wait until people are sick and then we treat the symptoms. We never go to the underlying problem. But even beyond that is how do we begin to examine what's the source of these problems? How do we prevent these problems then from occurring in others?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we know that this is what causes this particular disease or this particular outcome, well, we can say, okay, well, we can prevent that in ourselves. But what do we do as a society to make sure that we're preventing people from going down those pathways as much as possible?
And then that leads to, did you ever read the book, The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton?
No, I haven't.
Ooh, okay, that's a good one. Because he starts, again, scientific background, a biologist. And what he was shocked to learn, in a nutshell, is that our beliefs, which is our thoughts, actually are the first source of the problem. And so that goes back to what I call the results formula, where what you think cause your actions, and your actions cause your results. So most people will look at the results, the symptom treatment, right, and say, well, it's because you took these actions. But then you need to go back further. What were the feelings? And then go back a little further to say, what was I thinking?
Well, a
To
lot of
live
us
it
say,
forward.
we skip all those middle steps. What was I thinking?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that book is really good. I read it a long time ago, so it goes back to what led you on that path. It was reading a book like that, like The Tragedy of the Commons, right? It was reading a book that really got me to start thinking about, I never saw that connection, or I never really looked at things from that perspective, and really engaging with it and wanting it to apply to not only my life, but seeing the benefit it could have to others.
I always liked reading James Allen, As a Man
Yeah.
Thinketh.
Yep.
I love that book. I'll go back to that pretty frequently. I'll probably read it once every couple of years.
Yep.
It's a
Yep.
short book, so it takes me minutes to read anymore, but
But
it's a great
lots of
book.
nuggets of truth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we need to get back to, I think, that kind of philosophical thinking. I think when you look at self-help books now, they're much more about, I think more, and this is not such a new book, but I think of like Think and Grow Rich and the Napoleon Hill's book. And I never really liked that book because to me it's like, and not necessarily thinking of part, but just the thinking yourself into an outcome. It's like, well, you can sit down on a rock and it's like the thinker. And I always think of the movie Night at the Museum when they have the thinker. He just sits there, I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sit there and think. Nothing happens because we got to get off our butt and actually get up and do.
Yes.
And so you're right, that thinking, the thought has to lead to a feeling, to an action, and what is the outcome of that action? And we
Right.
often have to then rethink how did that work and then keep moving forward based on the outcomes that we get from the various thoughts and feelings and actions that we take.
Right. Well, that reminds me of a Japanese proverb. And let's see if I can remember it. But it goes, vision without action is a daydream. And action without vision is a nightmare. You need both. You
Yeah.
need to have a vision, but you need to act in accordance with it.
Well, that almost answers my next question as we start to wrap this all up is like, what's one piece of wisdom or insight from your own life or work that you believe can help others address spiritual challenges?
That's really a good question. I think it is the best thing people can do probably is get curious and challenge what they're thinking. Start exploring spiritual laws. What's the law of being? How do they define themselves? What's their I am statement? Because, see, I believe it all begins and ends in your mind. And so what you give power to is really in your thoughts. Those are probably the most powerful things that we have and that we exercise very poorly. So
Yeah.
it's getting much better at how you put your thoughts and feelings to create action that gets you going in the direction that you want to take.
All right. Well, I know we could keep going and going today because I know that first conversation we had, I think we went on well over an hour just for a quick meeting to just chat. But to wrap things up for our listeners and the viewers who might be struggling on their own sense of purpose or meaning or who they're visualizing their own inner I am, what's one small step they can take today to start addressing that?
Find a list of core values. You can Google that on the internet. See which of those resonate for you, and then take a look at your actions and say which of my actions are aligning with those core values. Take a look at your life. What do you do from the time you get up till the time you go to bed? And see, because there's where you're going to start finding your disconnect.
Yeah. All right. Well, where can our listeners find you, find your books? Any other information? Is there a website? Do you have social media?
I do. Website would probably be the best place to go, and that's livelifefully.com. And on my website, it has, eventually you'll be able to order my book, right? It has all my social media tags. It has blog articles. It has freebies where people can download a mindset guide to see and get them in touch with that. You can subscribe to a newsletter, or even better yet, you can have a strategy session with me, and those are free. Be able to help get you back on a path that you want to travel.
All right, great. Well, we'll have links to all that in the discussion notes. I'm going to let you just final words to close this interview. What will you have to say for our listeners and viewers?
Oh boy. Enjoy your life. It's a gift. And you are a gift, regardless of what you may think are faults and everything else. We're all here to learn and enjoy the process. That's what it's all about.